Hello and welcome to grinding meeting number 40. Delusion, Cynicism, or Stoicism. Some reason... Oh, there it is. Wasn't putting my stream up. But it is up now, and I am happy. Introducing the new animated mouth. Oh boy! That is not good. Oh. Yeah, this kind of describes a divide that happens when you have sort of a life-changing experience. I'm just using a conflict zone in the background from Elite Dangerous. It could be said that trauma could be, like psychological trauma, could be described as what you experience when you become less naive about the world. Because if you're naive about something and you start out completely naive, and, you know, maturation is really a process of becoming less naive. But every time you're confronted with something about the world that you find out the world isn't the way you thought it was, you basically have three paths. You can go into denial. You can act like it's not the case. You can become cynical, and that leads to some pretty bad places. Or you can just accept this is just the way things are, and there's no reason to get bitter or angry about it, and just kind of move on and say, well, this is just the cost of doing business on planet Earth. Let me get a little closer here. A simple example might be Santa Claus. You remember, well, this might not be such a thing anymore, but you might have, for a brief period, been mad at your parents for telling you Santa Claus is real. But you almost certainly didn't go into denial, start arguing with your parents that he was real. Might have, but probably not. You might have become cynical, but you're young, you're adaptive, you just start existing in a world where Santa Claus isn't real. Kind of a simple example. A more extreme version might be if you found out you were adopted. Again, you probably wouldn't go into denial, although some people might. And denial is weird because you're much more likely to accept things when you're younger. Like something a child tells a parent, maybe, I don't know, something about their political beliefs or sexuality or something. The parent is much more likely to go into denial in that interaction and just basically pretend that the conversation never occurred. But if from the side of finding out you're adopted, it's almost impossible not to become cynical. But if you can adapt, it also depends on how you find out. Like if they kind of just sit you down and tell you at some point, it's much better than if you find out on your own. And you feel betrayed. Your world changed. Your parents were someone you trusted, and it turns out that you can't trust them, and they're not your biological parents. And almost everyone will pass through a cynical phase. But if you can get through that, you might realize, well, if you adopt a child, it's not like you can tell them from the beginning that you're not my biological son, but I love you just the same. That's not really something a young child, even, into the teen years would be able to process very well. It's something you'd have to tell them optimally, when they're old enough to be able to integrate it properly. And you realize it feels like the world just changed, like the rug got pulled out from under your feet. But a more stoic interpretation would be that this was the way the old world always was, but you were living in a less accurate version of reality. Now, being deceived by an individual, gives you someone to be angry at. If you go into something more like, if at some point you were raised religious and you are convinced that an anthropomorphic God doesn't exist, you don't really have an individual to blame for deceiving you, because the people who were telling you this almost certainly did believe it. They weren't attempting to deceive you. From your perspective, they were just wrong. Which makes it harder, and if you'll notice, this is, what do they call it, the 7 stages of grief, denial, anger, I forget all of them, but, eventually acceptance comes at the end. This is kind of like that, because you're sort of grieving for the loss of the world you used to live in, but you do need to accept that that is not the world you were actually in, and you need to deal with reality as it actually is. With the God thing, you don't really have someone to get mad at. And a lot of people never, you have this kind of cynicism, but the cynicism it's diffuse. You don't have a target. You don't have someone an individual you can resolve your conflict with. And a lot of people become, very bitter. And this is a lot of what I noticed early YouTube days in the, religion and, the God debate stuff. I didn't realize how different I was. I wouldn't say I observed and learned, but on the rare occasions where I would attempt to interact with the atheist skeptical community, they did not, they were kind of toxic. They, generally were angry, and they didn't, philosophy was just like a set of weapons you could use to attack the religious people. And since many of them never left the cynical stage, despite their best efforts to convince themselves that they had, you end up either being angry at God, which is, a weird thing for someone who doesn't believe in God, but it needs to go somewhere. And, you could call it the structure existence, that, the world just isn't fair. Oh, that explains well. Another example would be, if you grow up, in a very patriotic family, and, America's the best country in the world, and a lot of stuff like this. And then, you hit a point where you start realizing about all the really shitty things the country has done and continues to do. You could very easily become very, very cynical. And a lot of people really get stuck. And I did a stream with Kava on the topic of unconscious presuppositions. And one of the ones I mentioned was the America bad unconscious presupposition. If you were unable to pass through your cynicism and, just accept that this is just part of the structure of society and there are no good countries. Okay, here's a much better way to look at global politics. The world is run by monsters being the governments of the various countries in the world. And there are no good actors. There are monsters and bad monsters, you could say, or bad monsters and worse monsters. I suppose you could put it that way. And whenever there is a power vacuum, a monster will move in and basically, I guess what the point I'm leading to is America is the most benign monster in the world right now. They're all monsters. But America is the least harmful to its own citizens, I believe. Now, you can find small countries that, smaller countries where, they don't seem as bad, but a lot of them can only exist as they are because they are under the protection of a monster. And this is the religious thinking seeps into everything. And we have this kind of dualistic, unconscious, theological mindset that we use to establish the parties of a conflict. We will slide into black and white thinking where, one is good and one is bad. And if you can establish which is the good one, then you know what the bad one is. But if you establish which one is the bad one, then you know which one the good one is. And if you become cynical about, if you're American, you become cynical about America itself, any of the other monsters, you could say, that it gets into conflicts with, you will presuppose that they are the good because America always has to be the bad. And some very, otherwise very smart people will say things that just don't make any sense. I don't want to get into the whole Ukraine thing, but just watching someone, all of their arguments must support or at least not conflict with the America bad unconscious presupposition. On the thumbnail, you'll see Marcus Aurelius. Excellent book, Meditations. So relevant. And it is a great book, but I don't have, it's difficult for me to have a great appreciation from books that validate what I already think or things that I already know about. So I do not want to say it's bad at all. It's actually really excellent, and I think a lot of people would benefit a lot from it. Because it's just about just accepting the world as it is and not being bitter when you find out it's not the way you thought it was, or that people aren't who you thought they were, or, well, even yourself, you're not who you thought you were. That people spend so much of their time and mental energy thinking about things that are beyond their control. And it's a self-defeating exercise. And it's also something you could call catastrophizing, where you make the biggest possible deal out of things. Well, you kind of get in the habit of it, but it's a way, emphasizing your vulnerability or your outrage is a way to draw attention to yourself. And it doesn't actually accomplish anything. I had some other examples, but they're not really occurring to me. I'm actually getting distracted by the fighting going on. Maybe I should hide this screen. But another thing is when you find out something isn't what you thought it was and it kind of rocks your world, this is an opportunity to have a clearer view of reality. It is, you were naive. Now you are less naive. Are you going to be the more effective person you will be now that you are less naive? Or are you going to become fixated on and bitter about the loss of the world that you thought existed, but you now know doesn't. And it's really easy to go from being cynical to being bitter and resentful and even nihilistic. And I think that there's a great deal of that going on today. Of course, everybody thinks their time is unique and special and things are happening with them that never happened before. There isn't really anything new under the sun. Things come in waves. And they tend to repeat. There's a line that I like quite a bit. It says, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. In other words, you'll see the same chorus, but there'll be some variations in the chorus, but pretty much all the same notes will get hit. So it is a mistake to think that there's, what is it? It's actually a philosophy of science thing. Don't assume you're in a particular place, a particular time, or that you are in any unique, or that you are special. And I screwed that up, but basically assume that whatever you're experiencing, other people have experienced. And that's another way to, kind of realize, because virtually everybody, at least in America, passes through that, wait, Santa Claus isn't real? They lied to me. Wait, there isn't a guy up in the clouds, looking over me and, deciding everything that happens on the world? Oh my God. And you can just, and I mean an actual nihilist, someone who has chosen the path of cynicism and bitterness so consistently that they just don't really care. But it's really just a redirected self-judgment. They, on some level, know that they need to accept these things and move on, but they refuse to. And it makes them not like themselves. And that self-dislike, and this is a bit off topic, but in a sense, and I'm sure this is some Buddhist or Hindu thing maybe, to where it's not possible to have hatred for others without some level of hatred of yourself. And I'm sure you can imagine situations where, yeah, there's a legitimate way, there are things that could happen that could cause you to hate a person, even if you don't have any self-hate. But you kind of have to dig into those a little bit. Like someone hurting or ending someone you care about. You're like, I would be perfectly justified in hating that person. But there is some part of you, somewhere deep, where you feel like you should have been there, that like you could have stopped it. It's completely normal when you lose someone you care about to just go through and try to think about what you might have done differently, or how your actions might have led to that. And because people close to you, you feel a responsibility for their safety and their care and their well-being. And when something bad happens to someone you care about, when it's done by some other person, you will generate an amount of, self-loathing from that. And a lot of times the best, I wouldn't say the best, one of the most common ways of coping with that is to redirect that onto the person who did the thing. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying that it's not an entirely external phenomenon. That you would not be capable of feeling as strongly about that other person if there wasn't a seed of it directed at yourself that you're redirecting. I must apologize. I didn't prepare for this as well as I thought. I thought I had a great deal more to say, but I think I am actually going to call the stream here. But I really, really wish, okay, there's one other thing, and I'm not going to paraphrase it very well. A person who doesn't go through the kind of trauma that comes from being, rescued from their naive notions. Someone who is just kind of allowed to believe whatever might be convenient to them and If you go through a life without facing significant challenges, that's the saddest thing of all. Now, it's sad when someone goes up against something and they choose, the path of cynicism and nihilism, and bitterness. That is sad, but even sadder than that is someone who didn't get the opportunity to experience those things. As strange as it sounds, I have had to face so many very big challenges in my life. And when I've talked to people, about these things, they start, I almost don't want to, because I there's like a sympathetic reaction. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, well, wouldn't you take that away? Wouldn't you remove that? You could have like, no, because that's part, you start plucking those bad things out. And the growth I experienced by learning how to cope and how to transcend the things that happen, you start plucking away those bad things that happen in my life, and I am less and less of the person I am now. And I like the person I am now. Don't take away my tragedies. Don't take away my traumas. Because without them, you don't have an opportunity to grow. I'm the Expert Layman. You all have a great day.